investment, but they still have to put in work, and then the parent helps, and so on and so forth. And all that seems fine and good, right? But I don't want you to come away from this talk thinking, oh, I should go, get my parents to file the 501c3 paperwork so I can get into Cornell or whatever. Because from the administrators and especially the couple of admissions counselors I've talked to, this strategy has quickly become well known. And so in the same way as, just being on the robotics team is no longer enough, having this non-profiting thing isn't either. And that's the trouble with these molds, right? Because anytime you see someone, someone doing something good, and you say, I want to be just like them, right? And even more so when, a third person, your parent, a teacher, whomever, sees that person and then tells you, right? That's even more lag, where you're running after a moving target. And that's why chasing this sort of existing mold is counterproductive, because you are seeing the same thing that so many other people are seeing. And if you jump on this bandwagon, all you're going to do is erase the distinctiveness that you could have taken advantage of and which could have propelled you to something that will truly catch other people's attention. And so, the essence of what I will talk about and what I am talking about is to focus instead on those ways in which you are distinctive, in which ways you are already dissimilar to those who are around you. And you may say, oh, I've heard of this. This is what they call self-marketing. And that could be further from what I'm trying to say, because what marketing is fundamentally is about the stories we tell others. I don't know, does anyone here have a LinkedIn? A couple people have LinkedIn's, right? I'm sure if you've gone on LinkedIn, you'll see from time to time people are posting. I see, anytime I go over there to update my resume or to respond to some recruiter or whatever, right? I'll see people posting about their daily Sigma grind set routine, whatever, right? And when you see these things, no one believes that's true. No one believes that someone's waking up at 4 a.m. and listening to whatever and doing their meditations and they jog and they work for 2 hours and then they, I don't know, go lift weights or something, right? It's just that's their everyday, 14 hours they don't sleep. Clearly what they're doing is they're trying to signal to you and maybe sell a book. That's what most of these guys are trying to get into. And what they're trying to do is fit into this mold and convince you that they do and whatever. But we are very good at discerning truth and untruth, especially in people. It's not perfect, right? We're all subject to propaganda and being lied to, but more often than not, that's the case. And I think the best bet, therefore, is to be truthful. And so what does it mean to be truthful in this case? It means that rather than trying to market yourself as something you are not, you should try to become the sort of person that you want to be. And by the very act of so becoming, you tell others the story of who you are. And you don't need to do any extra marketing or promotion or, deceit. And so the question then becomes, how and in which direction should you seek to become? First things first, you need to have a goal. Many goals, one goal, whatever. The story is the same in microcosm as it is overall. But you should have an idea of something that it is you want, that is concrete, and that is achievable. And these are, simple things, but easy to overlook. Many students will go and pursue a goal not because they want to do it, but because they think they should. And I can tell you, I went to school for computer science. I know a lot of students want to do that, or at least think they should. But, I have classmates who come out and are saying, I want to talk to people more. And so they do a career hop to consulting. Or they say, I hate how it feels like I'm doing nothing good for the world, and I want to be there doing good things for people that matter. And I'll say in computer science and software engineering, you don't get as much of that in other fields as you might in other fields. And so they do a later career hop and they start over as a grant writer or as someone working in the public service. And this will always happen. You cannot lie to yourself over the course of your whole life about what it is you want. And so you need to think, what is it you want out of your day-to-day life? And build goals that match that. So that's the first thing. The second is you need to have a thesis. One thesis, many, again, same thing applies as before. What I mean by a thesis is an idea of a way in which the world is not as it should be, but could be. That is to say, something where you think everyone else is wrong, or enough people are wrong, or at least the current situation is wrong, has not yet settled, such that you can take advantage of it and move towards the direction of your goals. And we'll get into this a little bit because I know that's maybe the more difficult of the three concepts. But before we do, you also need some distinctions. And by distinctions, I don't mean medals or awards, right? This isn't saying, I got #1 in this science competition, though that can be one. But these are ways in which you are different from others, and different from others in a way that positions you to better advance these theses, better take advantage of them. So maybe to give you an example, and now that I'm employed at Apple, we're actually contractually obligated to bring up Steve Jobs at least once per conversation. So this, I think, is as good of a time as any. There's a story we like to tell in the company about how, as a youth, growing up in the area and whatever, Steve Jobs really liked calligraphy, drawing nice letters on the page. And this was something he did as a hobby because he liked it, because it was pretty. Not something he did because he wanted to advance his career, or anything like that, because that wouldn't make sense, right? Like, what are you going to do with calligraphy? I mean, I guess you could be the United States calligrapher, but there aren't that many open roles, I'll tell you. But when it came time to work on Apple Computer, right, and to make the Macintosh, he had this deep intuitive understanding of what made letters look good on the page. And so he was talking to the engineers, this doesn't look good. These letters don't flow. This shape is wrong. And even though, he was the CEO of the company, he was able to get down in the details. And if you know anything about Steve Jobs, it's that he was down in the details on everything. If he didn't have this background knowledge, and calligraphy is just one example, but this background knowledge of how to make things look nice, how to make products that feel good, and not only work but also are pleasant to use, who knows what might have happened with the Macintosh. And what that means then is that this, what you might see as sort of a sort of accidental distinction, became crucial to his development of the company that I now work at today. And so let's try to put Steve Jobs into this framework I've put together. We'll say his goal is to start a computer company, right? I'm sure many of you would like to be entrepreneurs one day. His thesis then was that, well, if you look at the computers from back then, right, you can still find them maybe in some garage sales. They were boxy, they were kind of ugly, they were beige, maybe gray, and just broadly they were unpleasant to use. Whereas if you go look at, I don't know, chairs from the 30s, 40s, 50s, houses from the 30s, 40s, 50s, industrial products, people knew how to make nice looking things that were pleasant to use. And so Steve Jobs said, well, why can't we have both? Why can't we have a computer that is pleasant to use, that works with you, that has sort of a cohesive world story about it? And so that was his thesis, something that wasn't the way that it should be. And as to the distinctiveness, he had this background in design and art and maybe a personality that was nitpicking and focused on detail. And you take all these things and you come together, and that was what enabled him to build Apple Computer and to be such the success that we know today. And even though this is a very large, monumental thing, not all of us can found trillion-dollar tech companies. The world is very big, and the complexity in it means that there are countless opportunities. The mayor was speaking about, some very, what you could say, mundane things, where you see that, well, we all know that, the light from our houses is hurting birds. We've heard that factoid on the internet, but what do we actually do to fix that, right? That is something where you can say, the world is not the way it should be, in a small way. And, there are paths by which we can fix it. In this case, I assume, probably some community members came forth and brought up a proposal, and then that is what led to the enactment of these rules that now are hopefully saving many birds' lives. And working in a workplace, for those of you maybe who have a side job, and obviously for those of you who have a full-time one, there's no end to these sorts of incongruities. So when you get into the workplace and you see, okay, this is wrong, those small things can be the things that you fix. And that can be, your pathway to promotion, or that can be your pathway to distinguishing yourself for your next job. Before working here at Apple, I was working at a silicon startup, which you won't have heard of, but which is working on GPUs and things like that. And working there, the thesis I developed was that companies are really bad at working with both hardware and software at the same time. Let's say making silicon and then figuring out how to program it. And it's just because they have different production life cycles and different cultures, and the companies tend to be physically separated. And so this is a process which we need to get good at, but which we currently are right now. And so, when I'm going through a job search, that's the story I tell. But it's not because I am making this up as I go, right? Because recruiters, like admissions counselors, like you, can see through simple mistruths. And so the way that I tell them this story is by building my career in the direction that it now tells them. They look at my job history and they see, he's doing software at a hardware company, hardware at a software company, whatever. And the things that I have in the bullet points tell them that, right? And if they ask questions, I can talk about it at length because I've lived it. And that, I think, is the crux of this, that if you want other people to think of you in a certain way, right, if that's part of your goal, and I think for most of us, even though it sounds a little bit weird to say, that is part of the goal, right? Fundamentally, we want people to look upon us kindly, to pick us when it comes for, an election, a promotion, college, I think, is what's probably most on your all minds. You want to live the life that you want them to think you live. In the age we live now, it seems easy to just post some pictures on the internet, or with college apps, to just write some essays. But nothing is going to be as effective as the truth. And so what you need to do is cultivate that. Find those distinctions, the things that you have done, that you are, that are just a little so different, right? You have some weird hobby. You have some different personality traits. You have some things that you like. You have people that you read. You have places you want to go. No one is going to have all of those in the same balance in the same amounts. And so rather than trying to smooth those out, cultivate those differences. And it won't come all at once. There's not, you're not going to walk out and just be like, yes, this is my thesis, this is my list of goals, and this is how I'm now going to become a trillionaire or whatever. But over time, things will fall into place. And as long as you're paying attention, one day it will come together and you'll have this cohesive story about yourself for yourself. And things get a lot easier when you have that. So if there's one thing that you take away from this, it is that you should not mold yourself to what you already see in the world, but that you should mold yourself to what the world is lacking. Thank you.